Well, this hasn't exactly been a banner month for the workforce. The U.S. State Department has terminated some 1,300 workers, Microsoft whacked another 9,000 employees, and Intel is continuing its trimming of the payroll on its way to cutting an estimated 10,000 jobs in 2025 alone. And that means there is an awful lot of people who are soon going to be looking for work, and it should be pretty big news. So let's see how folks in the media are reacting to it all. First, let's check in on our pals in the State Department, see how they're doing.
I think every single person, when you leave this building, you walk through out those doors for the final time, you should do it with honor and dignity. You should not do it out of humiliation and of this type of weaponization of politics. You deserve better.
Wow, that's some pretty moving stuff. Now let's see how the Microsoft layoffs are being covered. Huh. Okay, well, the Intel layoffs are the biggest of the bunch, so they must be getting some super above the fold attention from the press, right? That's strange. The coverage seems kind of lopsided, doesn't it? I mean, why weren't there camera crews and multi-camera live streams when regular rank and file workers were getting the axe? What could possibly be different? Hey folks, Mark here with The Rational Workforce. Thanks so much for tuning in. Well, the State Department recently terminated 1,300 staffers, and that includes 1,107 civil servants and 246 foreign service officers with assignments in the U.S. And according to officials, this move only impacts non-core functions or duplicative or redundant offices. But that didn't stop pundits, political opponents, and the media from prognosticating that these cuts will significantly undermine the U.S. and U.S. interests around the globe. All over the office, we saw posters warning of the dangers of fascism and tearful embraces from heartbroken workers and coworkers and impassioned speeches from angry protesters. And it all painted a very different picture. And of course, the media was right there to cover it all.
Self-sabotage, pulling people back from the front lines when we really need them the most. Now that we have the tensions in the Middle East, ascendant China, and aggressive Russia, what are we doing pulling back the people who know how to deal with these tensions in the world?
Man, there are so many different directions we can go in with this one today, but the biggest thing that jumps out at me is just how politically motivated this coverage seems to be, and how much the other private sector layoffs that were bigger are pretty much being ignored. There's this weird dynamic at play where tens of thousands of Americans can get fired, tens of thousands of families are having their lives turned upside down, and no one seems to care. Yet as soon as something like this impacts federal workers, there is breathless wall-to-wall media coverage highlighting the plight of those poor innocent workers. Now, don't get me wrong, my heart goes out to anyone who is impacted by a layoff, especially at this point in time, especially in this economy. But rank and file workers who face the prospect of layoffs as part of their daily life get no such consideration, and that's what pisses me off. No matter how successful a company may be, like Microsoft, who has tens of billions of dollars in the bank, they whack 9,000 souls. And that doesn't usually happen unless there's a screw up somewhere along the line. And in the case of Microsoft, they laid off 2,900 workers in 2024 and another 10,000 the year before that. So that's nearly 22,000 people terminated in 3 years. And you would think something like that would be newsworthy. You'd think there would be some sort of examination of what's happening at the top. I mean, call it poor strategy, call it failure to anticipate changing business dynamics, call it sloppy hiring practices that led to overstaffing. Whatever caused the problem, there's a pretty good chance the folks getting let go had little to nothing to do with what caused those layoffs. And that's probably the case here, and that the employees that are being terminated from the State Department are just as much rank and file workers too. But let's be honest for a minute. If we're going to endlessly report on the plight of these federal workers, shouldn't we also take a look at the behaviors and the actions of their employer to see why this may or may not be justified. Now, one of the decisions made by this administration earlier in the year was to wind down a division of the State Department called the Global Engagement Center, or the GEC. Now, this was part of the State Department, and it was formed in 2016 by President Obama, and it had a mandate of countering foreign disinformation. But if you take a look at what they've been up to during the past decade, it looks like they've gotten mixed up in, more than a few occasions with domestic affairs as well. For example, during the pandemic, the GEC funded third-party organizations and NGOs that monitored and flagged misinformation on social media, including content from U.S. citizens who were skeptical of COVID policies or vaccines or lockdowns. And the House Judiciary Committee actually highlighted how these efforts ended up censoring Americans who did things like discuss vaccine side effects or talk about alternative treatments. And just through this department or through their proxies, they labeled those types of conversations as part of foreign influence campaigns. So those GEC funds were used to create blacklists that targeted conservative media outlets and even private citizens who openly discussed right-leaning politics or voiced concerns about other things like election integrity. For instance, one organization that received GEC grants tagged outlets like Fox News and Breitbart as high risk for disinformation, and as a result, their reach and by extension their revenue was negatively impacted, particularly on social media. Conservative viewpoints were almost exclusively targeted in this practice that many insiders have described as censorship laundering, a practice where the government outsourced the suppression of free speech to organizations like this so they could avoid direct First Amendment violations. And these are really just recent examples. State Department concerns, either through gaffes or deliberate actions, include promoting claims of Iraq having weapons of mass destruction in the early 2000s, of spreading disinformation about the Benghazi attacks in 2012. There were some pay-to-play allegations surrounding the Clinton Foundation in 2016. There was the Afghanistan withdrawal in 2021, and the list goes on. Now, if any private sector organization had a track record like this, there's a pretty good chance that organization would no longer be in existence today, and if it was, it would probably look pretty different. Yet, because this was a government-funded organization, it was allowed to operate so inefficiently, so incompetently, and it did so using our tax dollars as backing. Now, it's particularly galling knowing that not an insignificant portion of U.S. taxpayers were either targeted by or victimized by the very State Department that their tax dollars were indirectly funding. So now, as we see these tearful scenes unfold on the news and online, an interesting thing is happening. A lot of ordinary private sector workers and voters don't seem to care. In fact, the online chatter seems to fall squarely into one of two camps. On one side, you may have seen this as a great excuse to go after the current administration and spread more fear and concern and state that the termination of this 7% of State Department workers was going to plunge the world into chaos. Or the other camp, and there's a lot of people in this camp, you just simply shrugged and said,
I don't care!
It's not cruel, it's not sadistic or Machiavellian. It's simply a reaction to seeing one slice of the employment pie, federal government workers, finally be subject to the same issues. So before you jump to conclusions on how evil and heartless those who aren't similarly moved to tears or outraged by the media, absorb these facts. Since the pandemic, the technology sector has shed roughly 400,000 jobs. Consulting and professional service organizations have gotten rid of some 500 to 100,000 workers. The manufacturing sector has shed an astonishing 1.5 to 2 million jobs, and the finance, insurance, and construction sectors have seen high job cuts as well. Yet during that same 5-year span, civilian positions in the federal government rose from 2.28 million to 2.95 million workers. So, yeah, there's an awful lot of people who have been dealing with an awful lot of hardships, so you'll have to extend a bit of grace if they're not shedding too many tears watching these 1,300 State Department workers who had just been shown the door. Mostly because there are millions of people in the private sector who are still worried about how they're going to make their own ends meet. So, yeah, maybe these folks aren't heartless. Maybe they're just tired. Maybe they're tired of watching C-suites fail upward while workers get the pink slips. Maybe they're tired of seeing their own layoffs reduced to a spreadsheet while bureaucratic belt-tightening gets treated like a national tragedy. Maybe they're tired of being told learn to code while DC lifers get glowing send-offs and a pension. I mean, here's the real truth. In the world most of us live in the real world, nobody throws you a press conference when you lose your job. There's no somber headline, there's no viral montage, there's no think piece in the Atlantic. You just pack up your desk, file for unemployment, and hope to God that you can find a new gig before the bank forecloses on your home. So to the newly unemployed at the State Department,
Welcome to the party, pal!
it's not always fair, it's not always kind, but it's real. And now you're in it with the rest of us. And despite the tone of today's episode, I do sincerely wish you the best of luck. It's not easy out there, but you'll make it through. Now, if you like what you saw, or if today's episode made you think a little bit, do me a big favor and give it a thumbs up, click subscribe, ring the bell, pass it along to a friend. Anything you can do to help keep the channel growing, I'd greatly appreciate it. And with that, we're going to close this one out, and we'll catch you on the next one. Have a great day, folks. God bless.